Hello, parents. I hope you're all doing well. Um, I wanted to do a video today for those of you who might be challenged with your children slash teen maybe not attending school so regularly. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Solano. I've been a professional counselor for 30 years, and I've been a family counselor for going on 11 years now. And as you can imagine, I see a fair share of families and parents struggling with teens who are not going to school. Now, there can be a lot of reasons for that, I suppose, but one of the most common reasons I see is that their children and teens are reporting that they're anxious, that they have an anxiety disorder, an anxiety issue going on. Now, anxiety is an interesting thing, people. And I can say this because, not only have I been a professional in the field for so long, but I also personally have suffered from anxiety and for most of my life. Um, and one of the things that I have discovered, both personally and professionally, is that one, a very high portion of the population, of any population of people, suffers, if you will, from anxiety, experiences anxiety. And I'm talking about the kind of anxiety that would impede on, normal functioning in life, not just a moment of anxiety or butterflies or, you're going to give a speech or things of this nature, right? Everybody experiences that. But the kind of experience that sticks with you that, again, can get in the way of you doing what you want to do in life. Um, that's also a very common experience. So it's common, and probably the most significant insight I've had around that years ago, of course, but is that anxiety has many faces. Many faces. It was very common, for instance, for me to work with a family who might have two or more kids, but let's say two children. And, the child who will get the attention is the one who's not going to school. The other child is going to school, but it may even be a high achiever or maybe be a risk taker. It's like both children, experienced something in their lives that was traumatic, grew up in a trauma-filled environment or what have you. But they're both manifesting their anxiety in different ways. Anxiety has many faces, right? For instance, in my anxiety, see, it would not be my preference to be in large crowds. Where I had a friend of mine who actually the only place she felt safe was in a large crowd, right in the middle. Right in the middle of the crowd. Or, if she were going to pick a seat at a concert, it would be the middle one, like the farthest one in the row. For me, I have to have an aisle seat. That's my thing. I don't like to be closed in. Other people don't like the openness, you know? Or, some people like to hoard things. Some people like to give away things. You know, some people, you know, kind of keep a messy house. Some people keep a super clean one. Some people are bothered by clutter. Some people feel comfortable in clutter. I mean, what I'm talking about here is just like a super small fraction of all the different ways anxiety can manifest in a human being, right? Some maybe are a little more what do you want to call it, kind of culturally, socially acceptable than others, it doesn't mean that it's not anxiety. Like the person who has a form of anxiety, maybe they're a high risk taker, maybe they chatter and talk incessantly. They're extremely extroverted. They're black and white, and they go from 0 to 100 in like instantly. That's the extreme extrovert, and you've got the introvert. They're both highly anxious. It's just that one's a little more socially acceptable. Right? Or you've got a parent. One parent is super permissive and the other parent is super critical. Right? It's like they're both anxious. It just looks differently. Right? So when you think about anxiety, parents, and you think about your kids not going to school, that's just one manifestation. And there could be other little kind of, glitches or whatever, twitches that are going on with everybody. It just happens. That's the way that it is. And we happen to be living in a time in history where the prevalence of anxiety, depression, and suicide is skyrocketing. It's going up significantly. You talk to any counselor in a school setting, even elementary school setting, where kids never came in to talk about anxiety or depression. It's like they're doing that earlier and earlier, later and later. I've got friends who were in counselors and who work in counseling centers at the universities, and they're overloaded. I recently read an article from Australia that was saying that medical doctors now are seeing more people for mental health issues than they are for medical issues. Now, is that a result of all the mental health initiatives that have been happening over the last 15 to 20 years, trying to make mental health more acceptable and less stigma attached to it? Maybe, but I don't think so. I think there's some other forces at work. But just to say, parents, if your son or daughter is not going to school because of anxiety, don't get all worked up and think that, the problem is them or you've been a bad parent. There's just a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that is, all coming together to make a very anxious environment. I often say to parents, imagine, because I'm 58 years old. And if you're kind of like in that 50-year age or 40-year age and beyond, can you imagine what it would have been like to go to school or to be in a community where everything that you're doing is videoed? Not only videoed, but posted publicly, shared within your networks, within your peer groups. I mean, we see how this is showing up now sometimes, even for people our age or a bit younger, especially in politics and public, people are pulling photos and videos or what have you, of things that have gone on in people's pasts. And that's the past. But our kids are living in the moment here. We're in any moment of every day. At school, there are dozens and dozens of cameras that can instantly post things online. Would that not make you anxious? It would sure have made me anxious. I'll tell you that. And we all knew how rumors can spread back then, but it was all by notes being shared or verbally rumors and gossip. But now, look how fast all that can be shared. It's just the age that we live in. So maybe a few pieces of why, their prevalences of anxiety and depression and things are skyrocketing at this point. So go easy, parents. Go easy. Right? Now, think about what anxiety is. Right? Really, what is anxiety? If you're an anxious person, or if you've ever been anxious, which if you're a human being, you probably have been. So think about that moment when you were anxious, or when your anxiety got the best of you. What did it feel like on the inside? Did you feel confident? Did you feel powerful? Did you feel like a grown up, like a big person? Probably not. You know, the way I've always described my anxiety is like there's just somewhere inside me, kind of in my chest somewhere, there's a part of me that feels fragile. There's a part of me that feels vulnerable. There's a part of me that doesn't feel confident, that doesn't feel empowered. You know, it's an atrophied part of myself, or what have you. But the sense is a sense of fragility, that I feel fragile there. And so if somebody feels fragile, or somebody feels weak, or somebody feels disempowered, or somebody lacks confidence, what then, parents, is your role to play? Well, your role is to build confidence. Now, let me say, this is how you don't build confidence. By saying this, or these things, some of these things. Oh, you're just faking it. Or you always do this. And this might happen, one of the manifestations of anxiety is psychosomatic. It could come in headaches and migraines. For me, when I was a little kid, about the age of 10, I began to experience terrible stomach aches. And ever since that time, I've had challenges with irritable bowel syndrome and other things that I know is directly tied to my experiences of anxiety. So don't be surprised that if your child says they're feeling anxious, that they also have stomach aches or migraines or other things going on. But again, what you don't want to jump in and say is, oh, you're faking it. Here you go again. You just don't want to go to school. See, all those demeaning comments elicit guilt and shame. And when we feel guilt and shame, what happens? We don't feel strong. We don't feel empowered. We don't feel confident. We start to withdraw. Or some people will become hostile. Because it literally is an assault. Those kinds of comments are an assault on a person. It demeans a person. It diminishes a person. So a lot of parents will say, well, then I don't know what to say. I mean, I've told them that if they don't go to school, they're not going to graduate. And if they're not going to graduate, well, then they're not going to be able to get a decent paying job. And if they can't get a decent paying job, well, then they're not going to have a life. And yeah, wow, that's an inspiring story. That's what I call a tragic narrative. And the rule there, parents, is never feed a tragic narrative. Why? Well, because it doesn't inspire. It's like a weight that you place on somebody's back. Imagine that you want, somebody to move forward, and you're placing 100-pound weight on their back. And then you're criticizing them because they're not moving fast enough, or because they can't get up. That's what criticism is like. That's what, when you might make demeaning, critical comments, that's what that does. It's funny how many parents actually think that that's a source of motivation. It isn't, folks. Your job as a parent is to inspire. Your job as a parent is to make good on what I call a loving promise. What's part of that promise? I think it sounds a little bit like the St. Francis prayer, if you ever heard that. I'm not going to recite the prayer, but I'm going to give you a sense of what it is like. It's like this. When my son is in the dark, I want to be the light. When my son is lost, I want to be a guide. When my son is in the storm, I want to be the calm. When my son is confused, I want to be clarity. Isn't that true? Isn't that exactly, parents, what you want to be? And that's what it's like when we're experiencing anxiety and depression. It's like we forget who we really are. And when we forget who we really are and how awesome we are, and how gifted we are and talented we are and how capable we are, and we forget that, people love us and all this kind of stuff, we feel fragile and anxious about the world. And so my job as a parent is that when my son is lost and in the dark, I want to be a guide. I want to be a source of light. I want to be a source of hope. I want to be a source of clarity. I want to be a source. I want to remind him of who he really is. So, true enough, when our kids are stuck here in those places, we want to be able to do something about it. But what we don't want to do is to jump into the quicksand with them and get all worked up and, and critical and anxious ourselves. We want to remain stable, calm, hopeful, optimistic. And so if you see your son or daughter and they're experiencing anxiety, or they don't feel like going to school a particular day, then offer them a vision, a memory of who they really are. Oh, yeah, yeah, I understand that anxiety can be tough. Absolutely. It can be real easy to just kind of want to chill and kind of hang tight here today. So you're calling a spade here. Like, yes, there's anxiety, you're experiencing it. You might want to say at this point as well, tell me more about it. Tell me more about it. I really want to know, This is going to help your son or daughter feel cared about, heard, understood. That makes people feel great. Because whether it's anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues, they're hard for people to understand, especially if you're a person who has never experienced anxiety, depression, or other mental health issue. It'll be really hard for you to get your head around this. That's a lot of parents just can't get their head around it, because their anxiety doesn't look like that. They may be anxious in other places, but they've learned how to deal with it or manage it, or they have a socially acceptable type or whatever. Their anxiety doesn't look like this. So they just can't get their head around it. But parents, you don't need to. Here's the deal. You just say, you acknowledge the presence of it and say, tell me more. And so you get to know what's going on. You help your son or daughter, what I call, process those feelings. And you're not judging them. You're just, you're loving them. That's your promise, isn't it? To love and respect. So first, love and respect. Be curious, hear them out. And then you come in and say this. Yeah, thank you for sharing, thank you for telling me that. And I know this is tough for you today. And, not but if you say but, what happens is that you're trying to negate what they just said. Use and, the word and. Thank you for telling me all that. I can see that it's really tough for you. And you know what I know about you? Is that you've always been, a caring and mature and passionate person. I know you'll figure a way out of this. See, a lot of times what parents want to do is they want to jump in and fix it. What can I do? What can I do? Let's go make this doctor's appointment, this doctor's appointment. There'll be time for that somewhere down the road. But when parents get scared and anxious, that's their knee-jerk reaction, is to want to do something about it. Instead of just hearing their child out and building that connection and relationship, because remember, the person feels fragile. They feel unsafe. They are gun shy. They feel like they'll be criticized for what's going on for them. So any hint from you, parent, that that's happening, they're gonna pull away. You're gonna feed the tragic story, the anxiety story behind it. Right? So remember, when your son or daughter is in the dark, you want to bring some light. Or in the storm, you want to be calm. You want to be clear-minded, because they're not. You don't want to jump into the quicksand. You don't want to jump into the water with them and start panicking. So like I said, then you say, and what I know about you is that you've always been a caring and, strong and mature person, and I know you would want the best for yourself. I know you want to go to school, and I know, we'll work this out. Now you could leave it right there for a little bit, and then you come back and say, is there anything I can do for you? Would you like to strategize? Here comes the little bit of doing piece at the end. But make that the end piece, not the beginning. Most parents do come to the conclusion, right, that they can't force their kid to get out of bed. They can't force them to get out of school. They start talking to school staff and personnel, and pretty soon maybe a counselor or maybe a youth worker makes a visit, checks in. Sometimes that can be helpful. I think that's a good gesture for the school to make. It's a difficult thing for parents to do it all on their own. Sometimes a family counselor can be called in to do outreach work and see if the child is willing to engage in any conversation. Or that family counselor can work with you as parents to help you form empowering, strength affirming languages, or a language that's responsive. So because it's so easy out of one's own anxiety and fear and concern to approach the situation and overreact. So for parents, for you to get somebody to talk to as well, and to get some coaching on how to approach it in a way that's positive and healthy, again, can be very helpful for you. So think of that. Those options are available to you. But oftentimes, it's tough. The children might not respond to it. So I always say, always know what you're up against. Dealing with anxiety is not, it means you're not dealing with normal circumstances. And a lot of parents approach it and go, why isn't my child to do? It's kind of like, normally they should be doing this. Like, this is what I expect of them. This is normal expectation, they might say. And I might say, but you're not dealing with a normal circumstance here. You really need parents to educate yourself on what anxiety is. As I mentioned to you, it has many, many faces and manifestations. It will also be helpful to you as parents to know your own history in terms of how you grew up and how you were parented. And anything that's gone on in your life that has been upsetting or traumatizing or disturbing to you. Because any of those things that go unnoticed or unhealed, unaddressed, will impact your parental capacity and your strategies, your effectiveness, the way you see things. So you have to really educate yourself and get to know what you're up against. Right? You have a hand of cards that's been dealt to you, and you have to learn how to play that hand and play it well. That being said, there are just so many resources available. Because this issue of anxiety, depression, and other things, there's, you Google any of that stuff, and you're going to find a lot of resources. And if you find out who your service providers are in your local area, they will have tons of resources. I know in the area that I work in British Columbia, in Surrey, British Columbia, there are so many resources for kids to help with their mental health and mental resiliencies. Mindfulness groups, MindFit groups, self-esteem groups, girls groups, boys groups. There's all sorts of different groups that are going on all the time. So just a quick search on the computer for those things, or start asking around, make a few phone calls. You'll find yourself connected to a lot of resources pretty quickly. All right, so I'll leave it there today, but look at some of my other videos and you'll start to get some greater awareness on how to speak to these situations, how to respond better, how to take care of yourself better. All right? Speaking of that, you take care, and I'll keep posting videos.